I mean, this might be a typical apple farmer answer, but I like all of them for different reasons. And each one has its own peak season. So, you know, a Honeycrisp, a week ahead or a week behind its optimal time is kind of, for me, just, you know, another apple. But at its peak, it's like second to none. It's an amazingly sweet and tart, crunchy, juicy apple. It eats like a peach, like you have to eat it over the sink because the juice is running down your hand. And, you know, so that's probably one of the ones that I wait for the most all season long. So.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
My name's Rob Alexander. I'm the general manager here.
So Nature's Bounty is a 100-acre mixed-use farm. Our primary crop is apples. We grow 25 acres of orchard with over 20 varieties. We do a corn maze and pumpkin patch to kind of bring a little bit more to that experience as well. So it's a pretty fun time visiting here in September and October. The farm, in its current form, was purchased by the owners, Kathy and Marvin, 43 years ago. And it has been an orchard basically since the first year that they bought it. They put trees in the ground. It started with 5 acres and steadily grew. So the apple business has changed a lot in the last 40 plus years, but the pick your own side of things has been a major component of the business here for almost 30 years. So that part hasn't changed too much. We also keep a flock of sheep here. We do a little bit of everything, and we aim to try to be as accessible to the public as possible. We have everything here from trees we just planted this spring, which would be 2 years old when we get them, all the way up to trees that have been here almost, I think, as long as the owners have owned the property, so close to 40 years, if not over 40 years. Depending on the planting style and the age at which you get the tree in the ground, you know, even in some cases the second or third year, you can get a crop on the tree. So they do come into fruit fairly quickly. The more that you support the tree with sort of a structural element, in our case a trellis of posts and wire, that kind of takes the stress off the tree, the burden of growing big and strong, and then the tree can just put all of its energy into producing fruit. I'd have to get you the specifics on the study, but we participated in a 2-year University of Guelph study, I think 3 and 2 years ago, respectively. And they assessed Ontario apple orchards. I think we were one of 17, and they were looking for wild bee species diversity and just the number of pollinators in the area during bloom time. And we have they're in the most abundance and the widest array of species of wild pollinators that came up in that study. So, you know, we don't spray herbicides to kill, say, dandelions and things like that are growing in the grass and underneath the orchard, because dandelions in particular are one of the first food sources in the spring for the wild bee population. We've dedicated 5 acres of the property to woodland area, grass area, just to give kind of a designated habitat. And it's completely unmanaged, other than a little grass pathway that we cut through there so that we can walk the trail. It's just kind of right back to nature. And that's sort of, I think the other farms in the area probably benefit from that too, because it is kind of a central little hub. So we are an IPM orchard, it's called Integrated Pest Management, and chemical control is the last on sort of a list of different controls that we might use. The first would be sort of cultural and mechanical. So if there's a problem that we can solve through effective pruning or ground cover management or windbreak management, you know, sort of some of those host plants and trees in the surrounding area along the fences that might be a problem, just removing those or managing those better can help us prevent the need to apply a crop protection product later on. We try to keep sort of the grass mode, but we leave all the clippings, so we're trying to build the organic matter in the soil, just trying to keep healthy soil so that the trees are healthy, because a strong tree can kind of defend against a lot of sort of pests and pathogens as well.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Nature's Bounty. It is February 8th, so it's a nice chilly day out in the winter time, but it's not too bad. It's really, for us, the ideal pruning weather. And we're going to do a bit of a demonstration on how to tackle a big tree like this. So we're going to use this old crabapple tree as an example. And I'm going to cover off some techniques and strategies on how to manage a tree like this. Short term, sort of the pruning that you're going to do today, and over the long term, over the series of a couple of years. We'll cover off some safety tips, review some of the tools that we use here, and after the presentation, hopefully we can take some questions and address anything that I didn't cover today. One of the first things that we need to do when we're tackling a pruning project like this is to address safety. If you're on your own, try to find a friend to come over and supervise, or make sure that somebody else knows what you're doing, especially if you're up on a ladder. You want to make sure that you're wearing gloves that are going to keep you from cutting yourself at all. Safety glasses you could also wear. You know, there is a lot of sawdust flying around when you're cutting, especially up above your head. Okay, a couple of the tools that we use in the orchard for pruning. Depending on the height of the tree, we're going to need a ladder. And then when it comes to cutting, the number one tool that we use is a pruning saw. This is a Velco pruning saw. It's specially designed for cutting apple tree limbs, fruit tree limbs that are about 1 inch to 1.5 inches in diameter. We do tackle some bigger stuff with these, but this is what we tend to use for most of the pruning cuts. And of course we have loppers or pruners of various sizes. So this is a small set of pruners that we can use for small diameter limbs. And this is what I tend to use most often, which is just a larger set of loppers with a nice big sharp blade on it for making some clean cuts on the tree. And each tool has really a different design purpose. So the best advice on tools that I can give you is not to use the wrong tool at the wrong time. So make sure that if you have a variety of tools at your disposal, you're trying to select the right tool for the right cut. Because the most important thing, especially with winter pruning, is to make sure that your cuts are clean and tidy, and you don't want to shear off any bark or tear the branch at all, because that'll cause damage that the tree may not be able to recover from. So a large tree like this, the first thing we're going to do before we make any kind of cut is to make a plan. And so we need to assess the overall layout of the tree, try to establish sort of what it is that we want to do with the pruning, what our goal is. Essentially, the goal of pruning is to improve the overall productivity of the tree. And there's a number of factors that kind of play into that. But on the orchard side, what we're looking to do is maximize the amount of apples that the tree can produce in a given year. So one of the major things that we're looking to do is improve light penetration. So the sun, as it passes over the tree, it's hitting the branches, it's hitting the leaves, it's hitting the fruit more or less evenly, and that's helping with limb renewal, with bud formation, with fruit maturity. So all of those factors kind of play into it. The other thing we're looking to do is improve airflow through the tree, and that's important for pest and disease management, and as well for the overall health of the tree. So if you kind of take a step back and you look at the tree, you'll see that this has been managed over the years, and so there is some sort of vigorous growth, but you can generally see the skeleton of the tree. And these larger main branches have been here for many, many years. We'd refer to these as scaffold branches. And so you can see that over time, this tree has been pruned into sort of a pyramidal shape, or an evergreen tree shape that's conical. It's narrow at the top and wide at the bottom, with a bit of space underneath so that the fruit isn't laying right on the ground, or the branches aren't laying right on the ground. So generally what we're trying to do is make sure that the tree is somewhat even. And I think you can maybe see, depending on the background here, that this area of the tree is a bit more open than this side of the tree. And this is an area that we worked on last year. Again, when you're pruning and you're tackling a really wild, overgrown tree, you don't want to go too hard at it in 1 year. It does take time to kind of bring things back under control, otherwise you can damage the tree. And you can see with these new smaller branches and all of these individual fruit buds that this part has kind of paid off. So we know that we're on the right track. today and for this year, the focus is going to be more on this side of the tree where things are still a bit overgrown, a bit more wild. Okay, so we're going to get started on making some cuts on this crabapple tree, and we need to make our plan first. What we're really focused on this morning is decluttering some of the tree and improving light penetration and airflow. I've had a quick look at the tree and I don't see any diseased, damaged, or broken wood, but that would be the first thing or the first things that I'm looking for. And the general rule of thumb is not to remove any more than 25% of the overall tree canopy in a given year. If you take away more than 25%, you may take away the tree's ability to kind of regenerate itself and start to chip away at its energy reserves. You may also sort of spur on too much new growth, and then you're sort of going back the next year to undo what you've done before. So 25% is a good rule of thumb, and that does exclude the trunk of the tree in that equation. So we're really talking about the smaller limbs and branches like this. We're going to mostly be removing the upright branches that you can see that are quite vigorous. The branches in general on apple trees that are sort of shooting straight up into the sky, they're on a track to just produce more and more vegetative growth, more branches, more shoots, and that is taking away energy from the tree that could otherwise be put towards fruit production. And you'll notice these small little cone shapes or almost thorn looking things. These are the fruit buds. And there are definitely more of them on wood that is more at a horizontal orientation than the limbs and shoots that are headed straight up to the sky. Before you start cutting though, one of the things you might want to consider is bending down some of the branches. So the tree has already given you a branch. It's definitely more efficient to bend a branch into position and encourage it to produce some fruiting wood than it would be to cut it off and start over again. In this case, there is a little bit of a hole in the tree canopy here, and there's some new limbs that are coming out from the trunk there. We're definitely going to keep those and try to encourage them to grow over the years to fill in sort of this missing gap here. But generally I can see that this area is quite full. There's a lot of different branches sort of laying on top of each other, some that are coming out and arching back over. Some are even growing back in towards the tree, which we'll want to remove because we are hoping to have a good balance of branches that are sort of moving out towards the light at that horizontal orientation so that there's lots of fruiting wood. The last thing I'll say before I make a cut is that there's generally going to be two types of cuts you're making as you're tackling this sort of growth. A heading cut and a thinning cut. A heading cut is going to basically it could really be anywhere along a branch like this, and I'm just removing the branch kind of at any point, and I'm more or less cutting the head off that branch. So I'm heading the cut. At that point, over the years, you may start to see new shoots sort of emerging from where that scar tissue is, and you may consider that, as a technique to be used for certain situations. A thinning cut is basically where there are multiple branches, but at least two, that are coming off of the same junction, and I'm just cutting at the junction. I'm taking one of those two limbs or shoots away. That would be a thinning cut, versus if I was to cut it up here and just leave a stub, that's a heading cut. A thinning cut is, if used sort of sparingly and strategically around the tree, is going to keep the tree calm and prevent it from growing really vigorously. A heading cut can be used if I want to try to encourage new shoots and new growth to pop out in that area. Okay, so some of these larger limbs that are right in front of me here are really blocking the airflow and sunlight penetration into the tree. So I'm going to start with some of these larger branches out here. And I'm going to take it away in pieces so that I'm not making any drastic cuts right off the start that I might regret later. Because I can always cut a little bit more off or go a little bit farther back if I decide it's not quite enough, but I can't really glue the limb back on the tree if I've removed it already. So just going to try to untangle this in here a little bit. Start to cut. Even pressure, making sure that the saw is doing the work. So this branch is off, and you can see a little bit of rubbing here. So this is This is somewhere where disease might find a home. So if I'm looking to remove diseased and damaged wood as number 1, limbs that are resting on top of each other or rubbing, that's number 2. I want to get rid of those. So this limb here is quite a bit larger than the rest. Again, it's flopping over top of the others. It's shading everything underneath. There's a few fruit spurs here, a few buds, but really it's quite vegetative, so it's not really doing much in terms of giving me any apples. So I'm going to take that one off too. So I've cut fairly close to the junction of this tree, and where it's a little bit wrinkled, this is called the collar. This is where the tree has the ability to sort of callus and heal over a cut. So I want to make sure that I've left that wrinkly bark there and not cut into the collar, cut too close, because that will limit the tree's ability to kind of cleanly heal over this cut. And you know, I don't mind that this little shoot is remaining here, because this might give me another branch that I can have some fruit on in a couple of years. Let me see. So it looks like a little bit of damage here. This could be from rubbing, or this could be some insect damage, but you can kind of see how the bark is curled back a little bit. It has calloused over, so the tree is repairing that area of the tree, but or that area of the branch, but it's a little bit low to the ground, and I don't want any apples right on the ground either. So, you know, little things like this I might come back and clean up. For now, I'm going to focus on the big things, the big limbs. So this one here is a little bit large. It's really coming out, and it's sitting over top of lots of other nice fruit here. So I think what I'll do is head this back and just leave it. And I'm just being careful to try to not cut into the bark of the neighboring branches. There we go, I've done it. So to speed things up a bit, I'm going to bring out my loppers here, because I know that some of these other upright shoots, I don't need the saw for those. I'm going to just use my loppers here to cut those off. And I'm going to try to go again as close to the tree branch as I can without cutting into that collar. I'm just applying some pressure there, and the blade goes through nice and easy. Again, another upright shoot here. I want to get somewhat close to the branch and just clear that out. A branch like this, there's still quite a bit happening in here. I know that once this is laden down with leaves and fruit, it's going to be hanging down quite a bit. There might be too much weight here. So I'm going to head back a couple of these just to sort of tuck in the branch, but I don't really want to remove anything here because it's, or any of the large structural pieces, because it's quite productive. There's lots of fruit on this. So that's a heading cut. I've just made that a little bit stiffer, and it'll kind of hold the weight of the fruit a bit more. And this is maybe unnecessary. I probably don't need this one as well. So I'll just cut that off, make a bit more space. And now I can work my way into the tree a bit more and start to take off some of these extra branches that I have my eye on at the beginning. Now, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 branches all in this area. I might be tempted to kind of go along and snip them all off, because they are sort of all impeding airflow and light penetration here, but I'm going to focus on the big ones first. These 2 in the back, I think I really want to get rid of. And then I might decide later what I'm going to do with some of these smaller ones. I don't necessarily need to take them all off this year. You can already see that that made a pretty drastic impact just in that one section of the tree. So I'll probably take 1 and 2 and leave that third one. And that way the tree is still in balance in this area. So again, I'm doing a nice clean cut just above the collar here to make sure that that branch can heal. And I'll take one more. That's a little bit more even. There's branches above it that are kind of shading it, but I'll work on those later and try to get into the tree a bit more. For now, I'm just going to move a little bit farther along here. We'll do a bit more cutting. This large upright branch here, limb, so if I'm going to cut this branch off, I can't just leave the remaining piece here with nothing else on it, because it's either going to grow really vigorous shoots all over the place in different directions, or it may just start to rot, and that is not something that I want to deal with later on. So if I'm taking this off and there's nothing else, then really what I need to do is come all the way back here and cut it off at the next junction so that the tree still has it can redirect its energy elsewhere. So I'm going to get underneath here, and you can see from the rings on the inside of the tree, of course, this branch has been around for a few years, but it's time for this one to go and be regenerated. All right, so I've done some of the bigger limb removal. I've taken away some of those larger upright branches, and now I'm going to do a bit of detail pruning. So some of the smaller limbs that are really cluttered, really laying on top of each other, I'm going to pick and choose a few of these to go and try to leave some others. I will be looking to get rid of anything that's really low and dragging on the ground, because if it's already touching the ground, once it's got apples on it, it's just going to be down there, and so there's no point in growing fruit on the ground. So this is a smaller branch, but I'll take that away. I am trying to be careful not to leave any of my prunings in the tree once I've cut it off, just to prevent it from being a source for rot to spread around the tree. I'll make sure that I'm collecting up what I've cut off and tossing it aside, dispose of it properly later. Yes. This is still a bit busy, but I have made quite a few cuts in this area, so I don't want to do too much more. Definitely some improvement in this working area that I've been at. Tried to clean up what was resting on the ground, tried to thin out some of the extra branches that were shooting right up into the canopy and preventing airflow, and remove some of the extra dangling branches that were shading out the branches underneath. So there's always a little bit more you could do, but the important thing is to try to keep that 25% rule in mind. And knowing that I've got more work to do up top, maybe a little bit more work to do around the bottom and the back, I don't want to spend too much more of my time making cuts here, only to not be able to address some of the other issues in the back. So I've basically finished up pruning. There might still be a bit of detail work for me to come back and tidy up. But generally all of the larger limbs that I wanted to remove, especially on this side of the tree and at the top, I've more or less addressed. And you can see the pile behind me. It may not look like that much in terms of a before and after, but when you stand back and look at the pile of material removed, it is quite a bit. We'll call that 25%. So I don't really want to do much more than that this year. This back area of the tree may be a bit busy still, but that's probably a focus for next season's pruning, so that I make sure that I don't do anything to the tree that it can't recover from. And in terms of disposing of the prunings, the best thing you could do would be to, if you could, chip them up and compost them with some other organic material to kind of help them break down. You could also burn them, especially if there's quite a bit of diseased wood in there. You may consider burning as an option. It may not be the most environmentally friendly option, but it really is the best way to ensure that any of the fungal pathogens or anything don't sort of float back to the tree that you've just tried to rescue from those. Definitely, in terms of other cultural practices, keep up on your pruning. This is the main scaffold limbs and larger limbs that we've addressed today, but through the summer you can also prune a little bit. Just do so in moderation. as new shoots emerge and areas of really vigorous growth pop up, you can come back and kind of clip some of that out just to maintain that light penetration and airflow through the summer and into the fall. You want to remove any leaf litter that's under the tree. Scab is probably the #1 disease that will affect the backyard orchardist. It affects the commercial orchardist as well. But scab overwinters on the leaf litter, and then in the springtime, after a certain amount of wetting hours, it will shoot back up into the tree canopy and reinfect the leaves and the fruit subsequently. So a very simple thing to do is just rake out your leaves and compost them or mulch them as you would your prunings as well. Yeah. Let's go over into these Honeycrisp here. So just for the sake of comparison, you can see the large crabapple tree in the background behind me. This is a lot more working with the tree and kind of managing its natural growth habits, whereas this style is using purposely selected rootstocks that will keep the tree quite small and compact. They have a nice branching habit, so they'll put out lots of new branches every year. And this style of pruning, when managing these trees, as you can see, there's not that much difference in the caliper of the branch or the diameter of the branch from top to bottom. And that is on purpose. Every single wire here that we've trained a branch to, whether we've tied it or we've sort of roped it around or woven it around, is to give that nice structure to the tree and make sure that everything from top to bottom gets even sunlight and airflow. So this is a very structured type of tree, but we use a few different cuts in this style than maybe we would back there. And that is to sort of encourage the tree, maybe even force the tree to grow new limbs where we've removed them previously. And so if we use a technique called a bench cut, then we cut the branch off near the trunk, but we leave quite a bit of wood sort of remaining around the collar. And the hope is that somewhere in that little stub is a latent bud that will form and then push out a new shoot. So this style is very much about renewal, about removing even wood that's quite productive. A branch like this has quite a few fruit spurs on it, but within fairly short order, its time will come. We'll take it off. We'll encourage it to regrow a new branch here. And that's because the best tasting apples, the highest quality apples, come on wood that's, between 2 years at the youngest, but up to say 5 or 6 years, which is what maybe some of these larger branches are at. And the lifespan of a tree like this is somewhere around 25 to 30 years, whereas the lifespan of an older, say, standard tree or less dwarfing rootstock is 50, 60, 80, even 100 years or more, depending on the tree. So to close things out, I'd maybe offer just a quick recap. The best thing to do before you tackle a pruning project like this is to make a plan. Know what you want to cut off before you get sort of cutting away at things. Make sure you have the right tools and that they're sharp. And keep in mind that really, a tree like this, or one that's maybe similar in your backyard, has been around for a long time, and it's probably had much worse things done to it, either by nature or by previous owners. So don't worry too much about making the right or the wrong cuts or choices in terms of your pruning style. Apple trees are fairly forgiving. If you do something that the tree doesn't like, it'll probably let you know, but there's always a chance next season to go back and correct it. And you may consider keeping a journal or even a video log or some photos or something of your tree pruning year to year, so that you can reflect on what it was that you did in a previous year. And you can compare the effect of what you cut off last year and what the result was, and then sort of tweak your technique as you go along. The internet is full of resources for pruning. There's some great universities out there that put out a lot of content. Washington is a really huge apple producing region. Cornell University down in New York, they have a lot of really great content. OMAFRA would be our local source for Ontario-centric pruning and orchard care guidance. And there's a lot of YouTube videos out there as well that can kind of walk you through the steps that I've shown you today. So do your research, but don't be afraid to get out there and get your hands dirty too. Because certainly analysis paralysis is a real thing. You can get so focused in on the small details that you get into your head a bit. So don't be afraid, get out there. The tree will forgive you, and hopefully if all goes well, you'll end up with a nice, delicious crop of apples in the fall.